planet's on fire. It's a real code red. Got us by the balls, we're being slowly bled. All the swollen puppet head, propagandized. Big chocolate points, flat outlines. A house full of mirrors, it's a lousy reflection. Run hard left, it's a true direction. Democracy's in trouble, this news isn't fake. Everything we fought for is truly at stake. Border to border, coast to coast, it's time to cue the challenge and meet our host. It's podcast by George. All right, folks, it's showtime.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Yeah, it's showtime. You know, I'm coming up on a 4-year anniversary for Podcast by George next month. Done hundreds of these shows, actually. I can't think of any that I'm more happy to present than today. You know, the news a lot of times is bad. I mean, it's a negative. I mean, you got to know what's killing you so that you can stay alive. And what's killing you oftentimes is bad news. And that has to do with what we talk about all the time on Podcast by George, and it's the big three: climate, war, and healthcare. And we got a friend, we got a buddy, we got a pal, Matthew Ho, that's running for the U.S. Senate in North Carolina, and this defines his candidacy. We're going to get to him very shortly. I want to give just the brief version of his bio here. Matthew Ho is running to represent North Carolina in the U.S. Senate on the Green Party ticket. For North Carolina Green Party to run candidates on the ballot, they had to collect 14,000 signatures on this ballot. They did that by May 15th, 2022, and then everything kind of went sideways for Matt and his campaign. But we've got some good news here in the way of a news release, and I want to show his graphic here for the LiveLine because he's coming on. He's a Marine veteran. He's out there in North Carolina. He's been having trials and tribulations getting on the ballot out there, and then comes this news yesterday on Twitter. Let me see if I can get this up on screen to where I can read it. History is made at the State Board of Elections. The North Carolina Green Party is officially on the ballot. Now, again, this is going to be kind of small, so I'm going to have to struggle here. You know, my eyes just aren't what they used to be any longer. It's a part of getting old, folks. Green Party candidate Matthew Ho states today's unanimous decision by the North Carolina State Board of Elections to certify the North Carolina Green Party vindicates our efforts over partisan opposition to be able to run in this November's elections. He says, I'm excited to fulfill the remaining requirements to be placed on November's ballot and to give voters in North Carolina an option that truly represents working families and not the status quo, you know, and maybe more than that. We're going to talk about that. The State Board of Elections ruling stands in stark contrast to a decision made only about a month ago when the NC State Board of Elections voted against him on partisan party lines, 3-2, against certifying the Green Party's ballot position. Extensive and painstaking investigations found no evidence of Green Party wrongdoing. Ho's attorney, Oliver Hall, we had him on the show earlier in a video clip, adds that the NCSBE confirmed today, that was yesterday, I think, what my clients have said all along. There was never any basis to deny certification of the North Carolina Green Party. By certifying the party today, NCSBE did what it should have done 2 months ago. And we've been covering it every step of the way. And let's get him on in here now because I'm just delighted to have him on the show always and bring him back in and say hi to Matthew Ho. Congratulations, Matt. It looks like you're on the ballot. Now, yesterday I wasn't so sure. I thought there was another hurdle or two that you still had to leap over, but it looks like it's going to happen, right?
Yeah. No, thanks, George. Appreciate being here as always.
Yeah.
There are going to be challenges, and we've already been told that the North Carolina Democratic Party is going to file a lawsuit to block us and try and keep us off the ballot. And that's in addition to what the National Democratic Party has been doing for more than 2 months now, trying to ensure that we don't beyond the ballot, a spot that we rightfully earned. But no, yesterday we were very very pleased that the State Board of Elections certified us again. As we say in our statement, this should have been done 2 months ago. There was never any reason for this, but the State Board of Elections took a couple months to do very thorough investigations. They spent a lot of money on this. They spent a lot of time on this. And what they found was that we didn't commit fraud, that we didn't do anything wrong, that, again, there should never have been this delay in the first place. They want to say that we had to do our due diligence and et cetera, et cetera. The reality is that we were certified yesterday. We should have been certified a couple months ago. At this point now, however, the question is actually, I shouldn't say there's a question, because there's not. We've been certified. The next thing is for us to be placed on the ballots, and we expect that to happen this week or next week. The judge in our lawsuit, because we have filed a lawsuit against the State Board of Elections a few weeks ago, because we had been denied our First and 14th Amendment rights. We had been denied due process. We had earned a spot on the ballot, which we hadn't received for partisan reasons, as we could tell. And we then, so we filed a lawsuit, and the judge in our suit has, yesterday after the certification said, the suit's now moot. So Green Party and the State Board of Elections get together, figure out a resolution. We need to have that resolution by tomorrow, by Wednesday. And so hopefully we will be on the ballot either end of this week or early next week.
Okay, let me bring this up on screen, and this kind of explains how I got a little wigged out yesterday or last night, this morning when I was looking through this stuff. This is from NPR, and I don't want to be overly critical of NPR because I think they've been somewhat friendly to your cause out there. The North Carolina NPR folks have been anyway, Matt, but I want to read through this. It says, North Carolina certifies the Green Party, which could allow it onto the Senate ballot. And I looked at that, and I thought, okay, could allow it. The North Carolina Board of Elections voted Monday to certify the Green Party as a political party in the state, a decision that could allow the party's U.S. Senate candidate to be on the November ballot in one of the nation's most competitive races. And we can talk about that, too. This North Carolina thing, folks, is a big deal to North Carolinians, to the United States, to the world, really. Now, if a federal judge rules next week that Matthew Hoh can be on the ballot, it could complicate the election for Democratic former state Supreme Court Justice Sherry Beasley, who is in a close contest against Republican U.S. Representative Ted Budd. Okay, Matt, let's talk about that a little. What about that framing? I mean, I don't like that,
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to say I am grateful for the media attention we've had. I mean, the NPR has now run 2 national stories about our circumstances here. The AP has done similar. I think the AP's run 3 national stories, A-line stories, as they call them, that are right. I mean, stories that, because I've had that NPR story. I've had now my friend here in Iowa, but also too yesterday, a friend in Minnesota said, hey, I just read, and then my friend in California this morning just texted me not too long before I got on this call with you saying, hey, congratulations. And she texted me the MP. So I am very pleased that we are getting the national attention we are getting. And the reason why we're getting that is because I think anyone who's looked at this objectively, who's looked at this fairly, says this is wrong. What occurred to the Green Party in North Carolina is wrong. And again, I'm glad that the State Board of Elections reversed itself, but it shouldn't have had to be this way. And I think the uproar, the outrage, the attention that we've received because of it has been simply because it is so clearly unjust, unfair, undemocratic. In terms of the framing, I'm not going to get upset with that. That seems pretty innocuous. The reporter probably, we didn't have what I just explained about the judge ordering a consent order be hammered out between our attorney and the State Board of Elections attorney by end of Wednesday. We hadn't received that order until last night. So, I'm sure journalists are just catching up with the circumstances. But, but this idea that we are a spoiler or a threat.
Yeah, that's what I'm a little concerned about. I'm overly sensitive, maybe. I mean, but I look at it and I think this should be saying, giving North Carolinians an option for a candidate that's on the left side of the political. No, This
Yeah.
could be an issue. This could be a problem for the Democratic candidate. Let me, and again, I'm probably just overly
Well, I mean,
sensitive, but
it's
yeah,
basically, I mean, you could say that about anything.
yeah.
A new soda company comes out and it's like, oh, that this could be a problem for Coca-Cola's profits.
Let me
It's,
read. Let me finish this
it's
article here. So it says,
competition.
yeah, in the past, many Democrats have blamed Green Party presidential candidates for siphoning votes from Al Gore in 2000 and Hillary Clinton in 2016 as they lost the presidency. The North Carolina race could determine which party controls the Senate. Now, this gets to what I was talking about as far as how big a situation this is in North Carolina. And Matt and I go back a few years. He's been a big help with my podcast. Obviously, I'm a big supporter of his and would be covering this regardless. But, folks, this is a big story for everybody, what's happening in North Carolina. And I got to tell you, Matt, I don't want to be overly critical of NPR, but I look at this writing and I look at this framing, this context, this contextualization, as we call it, that they're putting in here. And I think, yeah, Al Gore and Hillary Clinton, but people, way left like me would look at this and say, if those candidates had adopted some of those
Right.
policies that the Green Party held during the Al Gore candidacies and the Hillary Clinton's candidacies, they might have been able to bring those people into the tent. And in fact, I think with Clinton in particular, they actually did vote for Hillary. But to me, that's the solution to this is if you're really concerned about this Democratic Party in North Carolina, I mean, assimilate these policies, move hard left, bring Matt Howe and his candidacy into the fold. And that will be the solution to whatever perceived problem they see with your candidacy. Yes?
Right. I mean, Gore and Clinton were not very good candidates, to put it politely.
Mildly, yeah.
Right. They represented the Democratic Party establishment and the governments that had just, the Clinton and Obama administrations that so many people were unhappy with. I mean, the 2016 race, to me, the thing that why is this not spoken about more is, 12.5 million voters who voted for Obama in 2012, then voted for Trump or sat out in 2016. 12.5 million. I mean, that wasn't the Green Party's doing. That was people who had suffered under the Obama years who were looking for some type of help. These weren't the racist nationalists because these are people who have voted for a black guy for president. I mean,
Yes.
these are people who were, the number that matches up, and it's not saying like a 1-to-1 number here, but the number that matches up is that, about 11 million people lost their homes during the Great Recession. And that just happens to coincide with the number of people who switched from being Obama to voting for Trump. I mean, you could say the same thing about Gore back in 2000. Gore didn't even win his home state. It's something like 300,000 registered Florida Democrats voted for Bush rather than Gore because people wanted something different. They needed help, and they saw that voting for the candidates that represented the status quo was not in their interests, again, to put it politely. And so that's what continually come back to when we're confronted with this. You're going to be a spoiler. It's, well, how is that possible? We're offering other options. We're offering solutions that the current candidates are not going to endorse. We are presenting visions for our country and our society that are nowhere near like what the Democrats or Republicans. I mean, we're simply providing other options, other choices. We represent constituencies that aren't represented. Look, I mean, many of the people who voted for Jill Stein in 2016 were those people who had suffered economically under the Obama administration. I mean, and that's what we see continuously. We have in North Carolina, rents have increased 30% since last year. In some parts, like where I live in the Raleigh area, they've gone up 50%. And
Yeah.
nobody is talking about rent control or other forms of assistance that way. Half our school kids in North Carolina qualify for school lunches because they're in poverty or near poverty. No one's talking about what are we going to do to raise wages. You know, I mean, so it's those types of things. We see what's happening with the climate. We have 12 people dying every day from overdose deaths. I mean, and of course, then the great issue of healthcare, which of course something you speak about so often.
Yeah.
Where are those? If we're not on the ballot, who is talking about these things? And
Well,
so that type of thing, people are looking for other representation. And then finally, I mean, you look at the if you can argue the numbers all you want, but the exit polls show that most people who vote for Green Party members aren't going to vote for other people. And that's who we're going for. We're going for the people who are disaffected, who've been excluded. We're trying to get to the people who don't vote. Because many years, right, as we know, the biggest block of voters are non-voters,
I
and those are people. I'm not
absolutely.
trying to convince deep red or deep blue Republicans or Democrats. We're going for people who need help, and we want to offer that help.
Well, and to reemphasize what Matt was saying, my perspective on this in 2000 and particularly in 2016, really what happened there is the people that had gone through 8 years of Barack Obama did not get delivered what they were promised. These guys, gals, whoever, they talk like Matthew Ho, but when they get in there, they don't do what they've promised. And that's what I love about it. I know this guy, Matt, he's going to do it. If he gets in there, he's going to dig his heels in. And the best example of how this can be accomplished really is on the other side. This Joe Manchin dude that's run amok in the U.S. Senate. That guy's digging his heels in for all the wrong reasons on the right side of the political spectrum. And he is changing, some people would say, ending the world, for God's sake. We need to get somebody in like Matt to do that. Well, let me finish this article because I want to bring it up.
Manchin's a great example of that.
Well,
I just heard this morning that the Biden administration is going to acquiesce and go along with the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is there's all the climate collapse issues, but that pipeline itself is an incredibly dangerous pipeline in terms of local damage it could cause to thousands of water sources. And they're going to go along with it because that's what Manchin wants. And what we saw with this poison pill laden climate legislation last week is that effectively we're going to be doubling the amount of land that's leased for fossil fuels, for oil and gas, in order to get some solar and wind. So it effectively negates that, neutralizes that. And some people are saying it will make it worse because we're going, every year the U.S. government leases about 1 million acres of public land to the oil and gas companies. And under the Manchin-Schumer climate legislation, that number is going to double to 2 million. So every year, the U.S. government is going to have to lease 2 million acres of land for oil and gas leasing for the next 10 years. That's a requirement. And lease 60 million acres offshore. So over 10 years, we're going to lease 600 million offshore acres for oil and gas. And they're still claiming that somehow, and if you don't do that, if the U.S. government doesn't do that, according to this legislation, this Manchin-Schumer climate legislation, no new solar or wind can occur. So, I mean, the suicide pact that we've entered here I mean, I'm trying to think of another word, but it's a suicide pact in order to get some solar and wind that, may or may not reduce some emissions. We're going to double our oil and gas leases on land and just exponentially blow it out on the water. And the harm, but to your point, that's what Manchin has been able to accomplish because he's willing to do that.
And look at his background. I mean, the guy's an oil and gas man. He's a coal man. I mean, that's where he got his fortune, basically. Okay, that guy's in there. Look what he's doing. Look what he's accomplishing for him and his cronies. Okay, move to Matthew Ho. He gets in there. What's his background? Well, he's a climate activist. He's a Medicare for All activist. He's an anti-war activist. That's what he's going to bring to the table. He can dig his heels in and maybe get something done along those lines. Well, I want to bring this up on screen here. Let me see if I can get to it before we move off, just to because I got a little film clip here, a little video I put together. I want to play that's kind of fun. Now, the board's executive director, before we leave this issue, Karen Brinson Bell, who was appointed by the state's Democratic governor, said, and I highlighted this, she was concerned that the Green Party signatures were fraudulent. She said the state needed more time to investigate, even though that would mean the Greens would miss a July 1st deadline to declare their candidates for the fall. Now, hopefully that's all moot. Hopefully that's all been resolved. It sounds like it has, but this verbiage, this fact that they were concerned, that they were worried or whatever, your candidacy just about ended with no proof, only concerns. I mean, that's kind of the terms that they've used all through the
Right. It's been very open-ended and speculative. Their arguments when they denied us back in June was that there are this, and if you watched the hearing yesterday, excuse me, my little thing to keep the light out, it keeps falling down.
You're poking me in the eye.
my post-it note, right? The great secrets of how we do these things. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so back in June when we were denied by the State Board of Elections, the argument was that there could be fraud, right? It's very speculative, very open-ended, just allegations without any substance and certainly without evidence, and we were never shown that evidence. And if people watch the video from yesterday, you know, you can see that they now use terms that we knew back then. There was a small amount. We found a few. And this is what we knew back in June. But they took that and, you know, we knew that there were these problems and these irregularities, and because the state had said to us, we have, you know, this is what we're concerned about. And we said, okay. And then when we get denied, it's because there could be more. And we're saying, what are you talking about? You never said to us there could be more. What's the evidence there could be more? And then after more than, you know, another month of investigations, there is not more. And that's, you know, this is why we say this should have happened. We should have been certified back in June.
Well, I want to emphasize the irregularities that you're talking about. That's mostly what they are. They're just irregularities. It's not downright out fraud. And the other part of it is every signature petition like this, there's always going to be irregularities. You didn't have any more on a percentile basis, I don't think, than anybody else that's ever done this.
We, you know, what happened is they go back and they look at, they say they have the counties go and relook at all our signatures. And so they exclude some because they say they arrived after the deadlines, or maybe they found some they had missed that shouldn't have been validated. But the number is small, like a few hundred that they, and our argument is that if we were presented with that, how many of those could we then challenge and said this was improperly invalidated? You know, but it doesn't matter to us. There's not enough there for us to be concerned with that. But like you said, George, in any petition drive, this is the way petitioning works. You're going to have signatures that don't count. I mean, if you look at nationally across the whole country in every state where petition drives occur, it's about a 75% validation rate. So for every 4 signatures you collect, 3 count and 1 does not, because someone writes the wrong address down. They, you know, they think they're registered, but they're not registered, you know, different things. They put you know, they filed their registration under John, but they write their name as Jack, you know, things like that happen. So, you know, this is not anything that's untoward. It's not anything nefarious, not anything that's insidious. This is just how petitioning works. And their state was able to use that to delay us for a number of months. And of course, now we're going to be attacked by the Democratic Party using the same arguments, using essentially the same arguments that there was fraud. Well, what's the evidence for that? Well, we will show it to you later, which is exactly the argument that Rudy Giuliani and all those crooks were using in 2020 to try and overturn the 2020 elections in courts, that there was fraud, that Biden stole the election, right? Well, what's the evidence? Well, we'll show it to you later. You know, I mean, like that was basically what we're doing here. And that's what happened to us where, you know, in June, we were denied certification. We said, what's the evidence? And we were told, we'll show it to you later. We've still got to investigate and find the evidence is what we were told, right? We don't know what the evidence is. We've got to find it, but you're not certified. And then, of course, now at this point, well, you are certified because we didn't find the evidence that you guys were conducting fraud. So, you know, and this is what we were saying. We never did anything wrong. We weren't running some kind of scheme. Our process had integrity to it, you know, and any irregularities that occurred were things that happen as a matter of course while you're petitioning, or were things that were out of our control and not a thing we were partaking in. So It is. I mean, and for us, I think one of the reasons why we've gotten such support across the nation, I've even gotten support from officers within the Democratic Party, both
Yeah,
nationally and locally here in North Carolina,
you
is
should.
because it's so grossly unfair, so terribly undemocratic. But also, there's real danger with it. There's real danger that
Yes.
a precedent would be set that, and we already see this as how restrictive and exclusive ballot access laws are throughout the country. But how ballot access laws are meant to keep independents and third parties out, keep grassroots campaigns from getting anywhere. But this would take a step farther because it would have allowed for the party in power to just basically say, we're not going to, we decide who else runs. We decide who our opposition is based upon our whims, not based upon rule of evidence or a rule of law or evidence or a failed petition effort, but rather just because we don't like it.
God.
And so the precedent was really grave here. And so we are, I'm quite happy that the State Board of Elections, did the right thing here, and they did it unanimously. There was no partisanship yesterday. They did it in a professional, nonpartisan manner. They were very clear. They were also very forceful, I felt, in their denunciation of the Democratic Party. One of the things that occurred after our session, after we were certified, so the Democratic Party had come in, and the whole host of things we had talked about this before. They were committing fraud by approaching our people who had signed our petitions and trying to get them to remove their names from those petitions, including by saying they were representing the Green Party or they were representing the State Board of Elections. I mean, so they were committing fraud in order to mislead people. I mean, all types of things like that were occurring. One of the things they also did was they filed complaints against 4 of the counties here in North Carolina that those counties have failed to do their duty in terms of properly validating our signatures. And the State Board of Elections looked at those complaints filed by the Democratic Party and unanimously dismissed them.
God, that sounds Trumpian too.
Yeah, and they dismissed them on
attacking the electors. Yeah,
right, and on the basis of no evidence. That was the unanimous dismissal. And actually, yesterday it was 3 Democrats and 1 Republican yesterday. So very much nonpartisan or bipartisan, however you want to describe it. But there was, this dismissal of these, frivolous complaints that, as the chair of the State Board of Elections said, this appears to us, I think the phrase he used was just try and take another bite out of the apple. This appears to me, he says, that this is an effort by the Democratic Party just to delay the certification of the Green Party. The whole idea being delay us long enough so that we miss the ballot printing. And that's what they're going to continue to do. Again, we have the local Democratic Party, North Carolina Democratic Party, filing a lawsuit against us or against the State Board of Elections, maybe, but we haven't seen the suit yet. And then, of course, the National Democratic Party, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and their big law firm, the Elias Law Group. They've been down here for months in North Carolina trying to sabotage your efforts, trying to upend this, trying to do whatever they can. They are the ones who are, again, committing fraud by misrepresenting themselves. That will continue to go on, and that will go on up until the day of the elections. I mean, the Democrats seem to be more interested in trying to keep us off the ballot, keep me off the ballot, than about having any conversation on healthcare, housing, jobs, war on drugs, the climate, etc.
Okay. Before we leave the topic, I just want to clarify. Now, that guy that was on the Zoom call with the State Board of Elections, has he backtracked? Has he rescinded? Because he made some comments about he was seeing some evidence of potential fraud, and I mean, he threw a lot of dust in the air.
Those comments were not present yesterday.
Okay.
Those comments were not present. There was a changed demeanor, I feel, with the board yesterday. I think they really are chagrined. They were hit with a lot of criticism from all corners, including from within the Democratic Party, about the way our certification was handled, the way that we were denied unjustly. I think they realized that they had no case in court. They realized that they were on the back end of very negative attention, that we also, as in our lawsuit, we contend, and we have evidence of this, that the governor's office was involved. The governor's office is an executive, nonpartisan agency, and that the governor's office was involved with the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee up in D.C. And the Elias Law Group. The Elias Law Group, of course, is also the law firm that works for Sherry Beasley, the Democratic senatorial nominee down here in North Carolina. So there's a web here and that we have evidence that there was very real political interference in the process. And so I think there is probably that fear, that trepidation that let's not push this in court because we don't want anything to come out that may hurt us in other ways. Like what if something comes out and the Republicans get it and the governor is implicated? What would happen then? So I think there was a lot of that, but the main aspect of it is there wasn't anything to deny us for. There was no reason to hold back our certification. There was no evidence of us committing fraud because we didn't commit fraud. So, I mean, there is, that's what it comes back to. But certainly I was saying it before about the way the words they were using, and the phrases, and even over the last few weeks. And this is something that we are dealing with is the fallout of this because we have been smeared. We have been for months now. I've never seen the public information officer for a government agency, when there's an ongoing investigation, make points about the investigation like I have in this. Generally, when you see an investigation, they will say it's an ongoing investigation. We don't have many comments. They don't say much. In this one, you have the public information officer for the State Board of Elections saying how there are thousands of fraudulent signatures. Right. And there weren't thousands of fraudulent signatures. There never were.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but the public information officer, the spokesperson for the State Board of Elections, is saying this over a period of months. So we have this that we've been tainted with, and certainly while we've gotten some great attention because of this, and this proves our point about why we're trying to create a multi-party democracy, why voters need more choices, why the two-party system is corrupt and undemocratic, that proves all this. The other side of it is, George, is that I don't get to go on to many platforms and speak about something other than this, right? I mean, I don't get a chance to really talk about healthcare, housing,
we're gonna
wars, right? Exactly, you will. I mean, right? I mean, but for the most part, you get on a show or whatever, and it's about, hey, Matt, so are you guys still committing that fraud? I mean, so there's been benefits to this. There's been challenges to it. And this is part of the playbook, though. This is part of the plan. This is what they do. They try and, for a minor candidate, a grassroots candidate, an independent candidate, what they want to do is exhaust you. They want to use up all your resources. They want to make sure that I don't have a big staff. I mean, I've got a bunch of really great people, but there's not many of us. So, we can't do the things we want to do when our narrative is dictated, our circumstances are controlled by something like we've had experience these last couple months. So we're looking forward to getting into the actual campaign, telling people who we are, what we represent, and why we are a better choice for them than the Democrat or Republican parties.
Well, I had a little 40-second clip that I put together with that electoral board head that I was going to play, but I think I'll because it kind of makes fun of him. Maybe I won't because it sounds he sounds like he's falling in line. Yeah, I mean,
he really. I mean, I'm sure he got a lot of grief too. I'm sure they got a lot of grief, and I've been very critical of them for being partisan. And yesterday, they were anything other than partisan.
Okay,
so
good.
I have to, I have to acknowledge that, and I am grateful for their work yesterday. Their tone and demeanor had changed again. Like I said, in the previous meetings and in their statements, they alluded to large amounts of this, or there's a universe of fraud and things that made it sound like we were doing some really bad stuff. And in yesterday's meeting, that language was gone. And again, it had been replaced by, we found a small amount. There were a few, none of this was connected to, So, I am grateful for their work yesterday. I'm grateful that they chose that they were nonpartisan, that they're professional, and that they represented the best interests of the state and people of North Carolina by certifying us. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. And again, here's what I would say. You think, well, the Democratic Party wouldn't do that out in North Carolina. They're not that small-minded. Well, this doesn't have to do with small-mindedness, maybe a little bit. This is big-mindedness because they know. I mean, the balance of the U.S. Senate could be in. Right. This is what we're talking about here. And they don't want a Matthew Hoh perspective in there because it runs contrary to their party and to their donors. Now, this is my take on it in particular. Now, you're on the ballot out there with a Republican. It's Ted Budd.
Ted Budd. Yep.
Okay. And you mentioned Sherry Beasley, the Democrat, and then a libertarian, right?
Yeah. Shannon Bray.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and here, I just made a little list now. And here's the reason to support Matthew Ho's candidacy. If you're in North Carolina, if you're within the sound of my voice and you support those candidates, but you also want somebody to dig their heels in and do something about climate change, ending the wars, healthcare for all, ending the wars abroad, but also the war on drugs here at home, a living wage, abortion rights. Hell, let's say you just are self-indulgent a little bit and you want to have your marijuana be legal. Maybe you want to have student debt forgiveness. If you vote for any of those people, it ain't going to happen. I am convinced, I am certain that voting for the status quo duopoly candidates, I'm talking about the Republicans and Democrats in particular, in my lifetime, and I ain't got a hell of a lot left, but I'm hoping it's about 20 years or so, none of these things are going to change. You must, to quote our friend from MSNBC, Lawrence O'Donnell, you must vote for a candidate like Matthew Ho. If you don't, it ain't going to happen.
Right. Because if they were principled, if they were responding to the urgency of what is occurring, they would have done something.
Yes.
I think I said just a few moments ago, we have 12 opioid overdose deaths every day in North Carolina. 12. Nationally, it's more than 100,000 deaths a year from overdoses. If there was a real concern for that, if our elected leaders are being responsive to that crisis, to that suffering, to that desolation of so many families and communities because of the war on drugs, they would have done something already, and they're not going to. They're gonna work around the edges. They're gonna pay lip service. One of the things that I know about the messaging of both the Democratic and Republican parties, it's very similar. I would say that the Republicans is maybe a little more grotesque or exploitive, but they certainly Democrats approach their people, their constituency, as saying, look, be happy with the crumbs that we give you, because the other guys, the Republicans, won't give you any. And then on the other side, the Republicans basically say, be happy with the crumbs that you have, because the other guys are going to give your crumbs to those people who don't deserve it, right? And you see this attitude of that, be happy with the crumbs you're getting. Meanwhile, people are suffering, people are dying, people are incredibly burning. They're drowning in a host of issues that is making life unmanageable, unlivable for so many. And we live in the most unequal society economically of all time. I saw someone wrote something about how you go back to the days of the pharaohs to find a society as unequal as we are economically. But also too, the very real dangers of war. We have this situation happening with Taiwan and China and Nancy Pelosi right now.
Yeah, I want to bring some of that up.
Crazy, and then of course the specter of war with Russia, and then the climate. The things that you talk about, George.
Yeah. Let me bring some of these up on screen, because I wanted to get to, and the way I want to preface this is, I've been doing this for a while, folks. I interviewed politicians back in the 80s, for God's sake. And when I pose questions to them, I can tell within a few seconds, these are talking points. They're reciting talking points to me. Or sometimes I will get this blankness when I pose a question to somebody, which may be more alarming. They don't know the answer. They don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And maybe the third thing is a little fear and trepidation. They're thinking about how they're going to say, what they're going to say. They're worried about what they're going to say. Now, I don't get any of this with Matt, and I just throw these questions. I come up with these articles. And so I want to start this, and we don't have a hell of a lot of time left, but I want to run through these. And here is the first article. Now, this is all over the news this morning. This is from CNN. And I want to emphasize here in this article, and to me, this is maybe the most important part of it. But this is in CNN, Matt, and it's in CNN Politics.
Yeah.
You can see I've highlighted this up at the top, these little scrawly circles of mine. And then the Biden presidency. Well, what the hell? Why would they put this in the political section? Well, there may be good reason for it. The U.S. kills an al-Qaeda leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in Matt's better with pronunciations in Afghanistan than I am, in drone strike in Afghanistan. That's the opening line here. The United States killed this guy in a drone strike. President Joe Biden said Monday in a speech from the White House, I authorized a precision strike that would remove him from the battlefield once and for all, Biden said. Zawahiri, who had just turned 71 years old, had remained a visible international symbol of the group. Well, I guess maybe it wasn't visible to me. Don't know who the hell the guy is. But 11 years after the U.S. killed Osama bin Laden, at one point, he acted as bin Laden's personal physician. Zawahiri was sheltering in downtown Kabul to reunite with his family, Biden said, and was killed in what a senior administration official described as a precise, tailored airstrike using 2 Hellfire missiles. The drone strike was conducted at 9:48 p.m. Eastern Time Saturday, authorized by Biden following weeks of meetings with his cabinet and key advisors. The official said on Monday, adding that no American personnel were on the ground in Kabul at the time of the airstrike. Quote, now justice has been delivered and the terrorist leader is no more. People around the world no longer need to hear the voice and determined killer, he continued. The United States continues to demonstrate our resolve and our capacity to defend the American people against those who seek to us harm. We make it clear again tonight that no matter how long it takes, no matter where you hide, if you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out. Okay, let's take that off the screen. I hate that terminology. I mean, that sounds like a mafia don talking there about taking people out and that type of thing. But a lot to unpack there, Matt. But right off the top, this is this drone situation that you talked about in Afghanistan months ago on my show. When we withdrew, you said, not exactly.
Yeah. This appears to be the first attack there since the United States retreated and left. And certainly, I mean, what that article leaves out a lot is Zawahiri was, he was more than bin Laden's physician. He was a doctor. I mean, that's his genesis, and he ends up becoming a member of these groups because of the brutal state of Egypt under Hosni Mubarak, a state that we sponsored and kept in power for up until 2011. Like a lot of these guys, this is how they become who they are, why they join these movements, because they live under repressive regimes and they find an outlet to resist those regimes in these extremist reactionary religious groups that often then use terror. And so that's kind of an idea of how Zawahiri becomes who he is. But he was the number 2 guy of Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden was the front man, and Zawahiri, from what we understand, was the detail guy, was the administrative guy, was the guy who made sure everything happened. So while Bin Laden had his face in the paper, Zawahiri was the guy behind him, making sure everything was getting done for them to do what they needed to do. And so when the September 11th attacks happened in 2001, the Cole attack happens in 2000, the embassy bombings happened in 1998, he is very much involved in one of 2 or 3 of the most important people for those attacks. And the fact that 21 years after, say, the World Trade Center bombings, or 24 years after the embassy bombings, the United States finally finds these guys, that should be the title of the conversation. That should be what the discussion is. Why did it take the United States, which spends more than $1 trillion a year on its military and intelligence, so long to find this guy?
Yeah, because there's a lot of backslapping going on now, particularly with the intel agencies. Look, we got him and that type. What about the angle? And I've always wondered about this. A lot of people have said that this should always have been a criminal investigation, a criminal action. Why wouldn't you go in there and get that guy if you knew where he was and make him stand trial some way? They droned him. But the thing about drones, I don't like what you see over there and what you think is great now, because we brought down this Al-Qaeda dude that brought down the towers. Those drones could be coming to a neighborhood near you in the future. All of the other weaponry in the world has. It's always come back to bite us later. Yeah.
We spoke about this a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
Last year, when we talk about that, because I had written a piece about, there is that, a movie where the actor Chris Pratt travels to the future to fight aliens. And that was my take on it, is that where are the drones? Where's the automated weaponry that we have now, let alone what it's going to look like 35 years from now? And we have weaponry now that is incredibly automated. About a year and a half or so ago in Libya, a drone fulfilled a mission all on its own. It took off, it went up, it found its target, it killed the person, returned to everything without a person being involved, the fully autonomous mission. Usually with these drone missions, somebody's flying it and, someone's looking at the target and saying, okay, that's the person we want to kill. And most of the time, or half the time, they get it right. More than half the time, they don't get it right and they kill innocent people. But so there is this robotic warfare that exists, and the potential for it is massive. And as we can see, say, like in the war that happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2020, and of course, the war that's happening right now in Ukraine, the utilization of those drones, they're so important for warfare. But your point that it will come home, absolutely. Look, I brought this up when we spoke about it last year or 2 years ago, whatever. There are hand-sized drones that are about the size of honestly, about this eyeglass case. It's got a little propeller on the top. It's like a little helicopter. And something like this is a hand grenade. And you take it and you throw it, and it goes and it can fly about 10 kilometers. And it can use facial recognition to find the person. So if you know that AOC or Mitch McConnell or whoever is having a rally someplace, you throw the thing in that direction and it finds them and it comes down and blows up next to them. That's a technology that's available. The United States military has these. There are other things too, in a sense of there are these sights that we have now for rifles, where the sight will track. You put the sight on the person you want to shoot, and then you pull your trigger, and the sight captures that person, and then the sight will not fire the rifle until the computer is sure that you will get a hit on the person you're trying to kill. So these were designed, those sights were designed to shoot down drones.
Can't miss.
Right. But they're available here. You can buy them for $3,500. You can buy a computerized sight that fires the weapon for you so that you don't miss for 30. That's just two examples of a whole plethora of automated robotic weapons that are being utilized now. And, like anything else, if this is what's being utilized now, what's being designed, what's being researched, what's being put into development. And the potential is very, very dangerous that these things can be utilized here. And then the other thing we haven't seen yet, and we're starting to see it now, say like with the war in Armenia and Azerbaijan or the war in Ukraine, is that other nations are using these drones. So where for better part of a decade or two, the United States is really the only one using these things, or some of our allies. Well, now, of course, the technology is available, the sophistication, and there's no moral or legal authority to prevent their use, because the United States certainly has not made sure that's happened. We've been grossly violent of all types of legal and moral aspects of this. Look, we droned on purpose funerals. We would hit, so like a guy like what happened, say, as it is killed Zawahiri, what we did for years throughout the greater Middle East was that you kill someone like that, and then you would do two things. The United States would then attack the first responders, the people who showed up at the scene of the explosion. They would attack them, and they would attack the funeral. That's the morality of the American government here. And that's why when you ask, why do people hate us? Well, that's one of the reasons. But you look at this, I think the big thing to say about Zawahiri is simply that as my friend Scott Horton said this so well, it took the American government 21 years to kill the guy who was involved with the murder of 3,000 Americans in 2001. During those 20 years or 21 years, the United States government killed 2 million people that had nothing to do with the World Trade Center attacks.
Right.
So it took us over 2 decades to find Zawahiri. And meanwhile, during that time, we killed about 2 million people, rampaging across the nation in just an insane blood and money lust, for decades.
Well, and that's just in retaliation for 9/11. Shout out to the great Lee Camp that's been on my show before. He says in the Middle East, if you look at all of our endeavors, all of our wars over there, that total is closer to 6 million. My God, just do a visual on that, what we're talking about as far as a body count is concerned. Okay, we're running out of time here. I want to get to some of these other topics, some of these quick hitters. Now, I'm not saying that this guy that they killed didn't deserve it. I'm not saying that he wasn't responsible in that type of thing. I just want to have people remember that last line and then think about what Matt's been talking about, that comment from Biden, we will take you out. Well, other countries, other nations around the world might see people in this country that they legitimately believe are responsible for wrongdoing, and that technology exists for them to take you, me, everybody out. I mean, this is a bad precedent to be setting. And speaking of precedent, let's talk about a little bit about the 2020 world that we live in, Matt, that you and I talk about all the time. This is from the Associated Press today. World one step from nuclear annihilation. Now, this is from the chief of the UN. I mean, this is something that we have been talking about and I have been fearful about for so long. United Nations AP Secretary General Antonio Guterres sounded the alarm over the war in Ukraine, nuclear threats in Asia and the Middle East, and other tensions, warning that humanity is just one understanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. I just don't want this to go by, people. I mean, think about this. The doomsday clock is seconds away from midnight, folks. The warning came Monday as a pandemic-delayed conference opened to review the 50-year-old Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and eventually achieving a nuclear-free world. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said North Korea is preparing to conduct its 7th nuclear test. Iran has either been unwilling or unable to accept a deal to return to the 2015 nuclear agreement aimed at reining in its nuclear program, and Russia is engaged in reckless, dangerous nuclear saber-rattling in Ukraine. Now, the attribution in this isn't real clear. I hope this is Blinken saying these things because he's a warmonger of the lowest order. I hope that it isn't just the Associated Press stating these things, because what I would say about North Korea and Iran, now Iran in particular, that nuclear deal, Matt, we were the ones that walked away from that. Trump threw that up and used it as toilet paper, basically. Iran wants to go back to that. But my understanding is the United States is not wanting to offer the same kind of deal the second time around as they did the first time. And people think, well, why are these countries running to these nuclear weapons like they do when relations with the United States fall apart? Well, it has to do with this thing called the Libya solution. They don't want to have happen to their country what happened in Libya when Gaddafi put down his nuclear weapons. And I think that applies to North Korea as well. I'm going to just shut up and let you comment on this.
Yeah, I know we have a foreign policy elite in this country that is spectacularly unaware of the consequences of what they do. And that extends across the board throughout all kinds of different areas. I mean, this pushback we're seeing right now against Nancy Pelosi's visit there. I mean, and I'm glad to see that there have been some within the Biden administration saying this is dangerous. Let's not do this. Somebody please stop her. But many in the foreign policy elite are saying we should be able to do whatever we want. And well, if you do whatever you want, there are consequences.
Ro Khanna.
There are consequences.
God.
You know, and that's the best example I can give you is with the Russians in Ukraine and you know, and got to put I condemn what Russia did in Ukraine. It's a war crime, it's a war of aggression. You know, I'm against their invasion and occupation. And, you know, you may not like the phrase that they were provoked, but certainly if you look at what American experts, including the current CIA director, William Burns, said for years, that this will be the result of our actions. If we choose to do these things then will happen. Well, you may not want to call it provocations, but you can call them expected results. And, you know, I mean, that's what happens in Ukraine is American government, among other things, preceding that even. But in 2014, the American government helped stage a coup in Ukraine, Putin's response is to send troops into eastern Ukraine and to seize Crimea. And, the same thing happens in Syria. The American government escalates the civil war in Syria. Putin says, if you do this, I'm going to step in and help my friend Assad. And he does it. So like this idea that somehow when he was saying, if you keep doing this, if you keep pushing me on Ukraine, I'm going to do something. And he does it. And the same happens with the Chinese. For 25 years now, the Chinese have been saying, if you don't stop driving your aircraft carriers up to our coastlines and humiliating us, we are going to do something about it. At some point they will. And they have been. They've been building up their military. Their military for a nation, it's about a third of the size of the American military in terms of dollars spent, but it's growing.
We did it in Cuba when I was a kid. I mean, the United States, no, you can't do that. I mean, you can't run that military up our ass, so to speak, in Cuba, Russia, or we are going to respond. That's what the nuclear missile crisis in Cuba was all about. There's a precedent for this. And I look at Pelosi going over there. Now, I'm a cynic, as you know. Maybe you can comment on this. Maybe I'm going a step too far. But I look at this and what the hell is this all about? I mean, Pelosi going over there. Why are we so involved in this that we would send her over there? And again, it's this what if thing that people don't like. But my God, what if China did that? Texas wants to secede. They're talking about it all the time. What if they sent over a Chinese head of state to Texas and delivered $14 billion worth of weapons to them and talked to them about, seceding from the United States? How would we respond to that? Probably the same way that we did in Cuba. But do you think that Pelosi is going over there because they're wanting to show this military toughness with the midterms coming up on the Democratic Party side to try to, again, employ their strategy, failed as it is, to peel off a few moderate Republicans to gain leverage in the upcoming midterms? Is that a step too far, do you think?
No, I think it's very apt. And certainly that goes back to when you showed the screenshot from CNN in the story on the assassination of the killing of Zawahiri was in the politics section. And absolutely, and we don't take, the U.S. government does not take prisoners anymore. We haven't done it in quite a while. It's because the American government does not want to have these guys on their hands and have the situation that we have in Guantanamo, where we have these indefinite prisoners, these people who've never been charged with anything, many of them free to be cleared at this point. In Guantanamo, it's important to remind people, we had 800 prisoners down there. We now have about 30. The 770 that have been released, none of them had any charges against them. I mean, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of innocent people that we detained and tortured and put in Guantanamo Bay for decades. And now we have this circumstance where about 30 people are there or so. Half of them have never been charged with anything, but we can't find a way to get them back home, even though we kidnapped them, tortured them, and held them for 2 decades in prison. And then the other dozen or so that are there have been charged, but we tortured them, so we can never bring them to trial. So that's why the American government, like say in 2011, when the American government or 2010, when the American government, it was 2011 when the United States killed Osama bin Laden, there was no capture order in that. It was a kill order because the Obama administration did not want to have to deal with Osama bin Laden sitting in Guantanamo Bay, where he'd probably still be now without charges at this point. So better off to kill the guy than have to deal with the spectacle and the hassle of having these guys in a clearly illegal or illegal circumstances, as we're beating our chests about what a great system we have. And we can't even bring to trial and convict the people who killed 3,000 of our citizens who admitted they killed him. I mean,
bragged about it.
Yeah. They wasn't like they were like, no, we didn't do it. Like they admitted they did it. So in the fact that we never get any justice in the framework of what we claim we're so great about. is such a terrible tragedy. And I do want to address, you brought up the Libya thing, and I know that's a long way to get back to it.
Oh, that's okay.
But yeah, I mean, that's the circumstances with the Libya situation, is simply that Muammar Gaddafi and his government remove themselves from any nuclear weapons programs, biological programs, chemical weapons programs. They say, hey, we'll cooperate with the West, and then they are invaded. Their government's destroyed. There's a civil war that's still raging 11 years later, 12 years later. The people of Libya are still living amidst civil war. It's terrible circumstances for the
open slave trading is what I heard on
Yeah,
the streets.
yeah.
Explain what happened to Gaddafi. That also is another reason not to want to do that type of thing. His end was not a good one.
Right, and he was his convoy was targeted by NATO aircraft and driven off the road, and then his convoy was overtaken by militia that were coordinating with NATO. And these militia, as anyone would guess, are really bad people. These are reactionary religious zealots. They are ties to Islamic State and Al Qaeda. That's how this keeps working, that the United States and its allies are in bed with these types because we think we can use these people to achieve our ends, that somehow we can use these groups in order to, whether it's in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, use these organizations for our purposes, and that you won't have the blowback that Chalmers Johnson so rightly coined that term. I believe it was him who coined the term, but like this idea that this won't blow up in our faces. And that's exactly what's happened to the people of Libya. The whole Libya thing is just so dirty. If people look into the reasons for it, the UK Parliament did an official inquiry, and the UK Parliament came back and said this was a war, and the war in Libya was built on lies. That's what the United Kingdom's Parliament said. The French have done investigations because their president was so dirty in all this, in terms of, we have documentation from the French why the French wanted to overthrow Gaddafi. It had a lot to do with improving business for French companies, for ensuring French control over oil and gas resources in Libya, and then for destroying Gaddafi's attempt to create like a pan-European currency that will compete with the euro and with the dollar. This is not something speculation. This is actually stuff that was documented by the French government in terms of its purposes for wanting to overthrow Gaddafi, and certainly the United States was very pleased to go along with it, and was very much involved, and did its best to see that happen. And now, again, 11, 12 years later, the country is in ruins, fighting still concerns. It's still occurring. This was the nation. Libya had the
kind of democracy, yeah.
And they had the highest standard of living in all of Africa, or the second highest standard of living in all of Africa. And now, as you say, it's devolved to the point that there are slave markets there. And it was a war built on lies. I mean, people remember, go back 10 years. You had Susan Rice, the American security advisor, saying that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra to his troops.
And she's still spooking around. God, that was so
complete lie. All those
complete craziness.
Lies. All that was lies, and all the people who have died because of the lies, just like in Afghanistan and Iraq and in Syria and Yemen and Somalia, everywhere else. And now, as we see Ukraine, there are lies. That is probably. I'd like to see someone do some a real good study on it, in terms of trying to figure out, is this the war that's the most lied about, which is just an insane proposition, because all wars are built on lies. But in Ukraine, on both sides, everything is just one lie. It's just one. You have no understanding of what's happening. Anyone who tells you they understand what's happening in Ukraine is either a fool or a liar, because it's so heavily propagandized. It's so covered by lies from all sides. The reporting has just been awful, always.
Which is war.
Which is war. Yeah.
Right. Propaganda. I mean, the heads of state, governments all over the world, whenever a war breaks out, all rules are off. I mean, make it up as you go along. It's propaganda is fair game. And that's exactly what's happening in Ukraine, because it's a war. We're out of time. Honest to God, we're over time, man. Now I'm going to bring this up on screen. I love this guy. And as you noticed, if you saw those responses, this guy will tell you what he thinks. There's no backup in Matthew Ho. This is what I like in particular. I'm going to bring this. I have these little banners that I bring up. Now, this is your email address. If people want to email you, info@MatthewHoforsenate.org. If you want to participate in the campaign, if you've got some talent, skill, or money that you can help Matt with. It's MatthewHoforSenate.org. I should have been saying these things throughout the broadcast, but I'm going to let you close, Matt. If you want to reemphasize those points or anything else you want to talk about here as we wrap up, please do so.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a terrible candidate because I'm supposed to say that like
I know it.
right, like every there's a but I think my folks have given up trying to teach me at this point. But yeah, if people can help, particularly with the donations, we are a small campaign, a grassroots campaign. We earn in a month. We bring in donations in a month what our Republican and Democratic opponents bring in half a day. But we don't take corporate donations. We don't take money from the super PACs. We don't have dark money supporting us, and that's why we're able to represent working families, people in our neighborhoods, people in our lives, because that's what we do. But if people can support us, please do it. MatthewHoforSenate.org, and encourage others to donate. Look, we may have gotten past one Goliath here in terms of the state board of elections, but now we have to fight the Democratic Party to make sure that we're on the ballot, and we need that help. So please donate if you can at MatthewHoforSenate.org.
That's great, man. He's got the answers. He's got the courage. He's ready to go. I mean, he's on the ballot out there in North Carolina. Let's help out, folks. Let's do what we can. I feel good about it. I mean, this is the kind of candidate that I want to support. Matt, thanks again, as always, pal. We'll check back in very shortly, but thanks for coming again on the Podcast by George LiveLine.
Thanks, George, and thanks, everyone, for watching and listening.
Yeah, and folks, if you like Podcast by George, my thing that I always tell people is, there he is, full screen. Let me bring up myself full screen, which is what I wanted to do here to get my little close. Here we go. There it is. Hey. So go to podcastbygeorge.com, and I've even got a little graphic here. Let me find this thing. I think I can bring this up on screen and show you what podcastbygeorge.com, the homepage, looks like. And there it is. So there's what it looks like. There it is, big screen. Those little icons that I have circled there, that's where you can click to go to the platform that you prefer. Video would be Facebook and YouTube, but the others are audio platforms. And subscribe, sign up. It's free. And then you'll be notified, and particularly on YouTube, if you ring the notification bell, each and every time Podcast by George releases a new video. But we're going to let him go. We're going to come back in here. We're going to tell everybody thanks for participating in the live line. The comments were great, as always. And let you know that we'll be back on very shortly. We've got the great Laura Bellin coming on to talk about the latest hostage taking in the heartland, politically speaking. I mean, it's pretty interesting stuff, folks. Please stay tuned for that. But that's going to do it for now. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.